This is the panel, The Art of Belonging, and I'm going to do my predetermined opening statement that before we begin, I would like to let you know that books by all of these wonderful authors, I read all their books, that was required, but I loved all their books and had read many of their books beforehand, so it was an absolute pleasure, and I'm so happy to be in conversation with these three phenomenal writers, phenomenal people individually, so thank you for being here. Again, their books are for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. We love Greenlight, and they're outside on the plaza. And all the authors will be signing downstairs on the rotunda. I believe the bathroom is on this floor as well, and also there might be a water fountain. See the hydration? It comes full circle, friends. So again, they said please clear the room afterwards, and thank you again. So what we're going to do is we're going to do reading, question, reading, question, reading. Does that work? And then if time permits, someone's going to let me know, and we're going to do a Q&A. But you can also talk to these wonderful authors. I'm going to use a lot of great adjectives for y'all downstairs when they're signing. And now I'm going to do a quick review of their bio, and then Angie is going to be the first to read from her wonderful, wonderful book, Dominicana. Angie Cruz is the author of the novel Soledad and Let It Rain Coffee, a finalist in 2017 for the Impact Dublin Literary Award. She has published work in the New York Times, VQR, Gulf Coast Literary Journal, and other publications. She received fellowships from NIFA, Yaddo, and McDowell. She's the founder and editor-in-chief of Asterix, a literary and arts journal. She is an associate professor of English at the University of Pittsburgh, and Dominicana is inspired by her mother's story. Courtney Maum is the author of the novels Touch and I Am Having So Much Fun Here Without You, the chapbook Notes from Mexico, and the forthcoming handbook Before and After the Book Deal, a writer's guide to finishing, publishing, promoting, and surviving your first book. Her writing has been widely published in such outlets as BuzzFeed, New York Times, Oprah Magazine, and Modern Loss. She is the founder of the learning collaborative The Cabins, and she also works as a product and cosmetic shade namer from her home in Connecticut. Nafisa Thompson Spires' debut was longlisted for the National Book Award, a finalist for the Kirkus Award, awarded the Penn Open Book Award, the LA Times Art Seidenbaum Award for First Fiction, and she is a 2019 Whiting Award winner. She earned a doctorate in English from Vanderbilt University and an MFA in creative writing from the University of Illinois, and her writing has appeared in the Paris Review, Feminist Wire, Story Quarterly, among others. And I'm Jen Baker, so we're not gonna get into my resume, because it's not about me.
It's so great to be here with all of you, and I'm just going to get to it so we have a lot of time to talk later. I'm reading from Dominicana. I'm going to skip a little bit to the early middle of the first part, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Papa says, even one drop of water could fill a bucket if you wait around long enough. Between Mama's letters, the free beers, and yearly visits, Juan Ruiz finally asked properly for my hand in marriage. I am 15, Juan is 32. He shows up during the daytime with Ramon, sober, or as sober as I've ever seen him, not flailing his arms or grabbing at me and Mama, the chair, a tree, to hold himself up. For the first time ever, I see him, really see him. He even takes off his suit jacket in only a tailored vest, and without his shoulder pads, his shoulders become small, less threatening. Ana, Juan says. In such a serious way, everyone stares with bated breath. I wear my Sunday dress, a faded yellow one I can't breathe well in. Frizz crowns my head, my tongue dry, my throat aching. I knew this moment would come from the first serenade. Juan towers over me. I focus on the thin gray lines on his vest, the way they intersect at the lapels, the sweat running down his cheeks over the incoming stubble. I try not to look at him, but they all stare. My sister Teresa stands close by with her son on her hip. My mother's teeth are exposed, her lipstick caked on her bottom lip. My brothers, Johnny and Lenny, lie on a bench like overheated dogs, so thirsty, their tongues hanging out of their mouths. I look for Papa, who stands quietly, defeated. Where is your rifle? Where is your scowl? I want to scream. What is it? I ask. Has my lipstick already stained my teeth? And suddenly, Juan pulls out a handkerchief from his pocket and wipes all the lipstick off. What are you doing? I push him away. You don't need that stuff. You don't need anything, he says. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. He's undone just by looking at me. I open my eyes wider, hold my chest higher, and a smile escapes the side of my lips. Everyone wants something from a man like Juan. A visa, dollars, a good word, a ride in his car, a free meal in his restaurant. Even if my mother wants all those things, I keep my grace. Will you be my wife? He asks. Ramon stands behind Juan as if without him there, Juan will split, run away, take it all back. And I understand then that maybe Juan doesn't want to marry me after all. They are here from my parents' land. I could have said no. Teresa's mouth tight-lipped and pursed in disappointment. You have rights, she said days before. You're the boss of you. I look to Papa for an answer. Go ahead, answer him, Papa says. Mama grabs Papa's arm in solidarity, an unusual gesture, understood by Ramon because he smiles and shakes my father's hand as if I have already said yes, although nobody cares what I want. Johnny and Lenny run around singing, I like to be in America, everything free in America. In minutes, the adults distance themselves to make the arrangements. Johnny and Lenny grab my hands and spin me around like they did in the West Side Story musical we had seen at the theater in the center. Juanita and Betty run out and join in the celebration. Wow, prima, you're so lucky, Betty says. Don't forget to send me something. Me too, Juanita's voice, laced with a mix of envy and hope. After you see all those bright lights, I bet you're never coming back here. Get the refresco, Mama yells over to Johnny. We have to celebrate. Teresa stomps back into the house and watches everything transpire from the window. She holds her baby in her arms, tighter, closer to her chest, as if to keep me from reading her thoughts. Who would cover for her when she wanted to sneak away? Who would do all her chores? Then it really hits me. I'm leaving. Dread and fear and excitement ripple through my body. Once I leave, no one will ever treat me the same. My life will be a load of gossip material for Juanita and Betty, who lost their parents in a flood and have lived with us ever since I can remember. I'll be the woman with dollars and fine clothes and beautiful skin from all the good lotions Juan will buy me in America. I will be given lists upon lists with orders to be filled. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you read that portion especially because I kind of wanted to talk about mothers. And mothers play, if not a role, a prominent role in various people's books here. And Nafisa, especially, I was thinking about Fatima, who comes up several times in Heads of the Colored People, and like how we're kind of introduced to her through the mom's letters, and then we actually see a bit more of her perspective. And I know, like on a personal level, my mother was a single mother, so that really instigated and also like just taught me this is how you act, this is how you behave. It's not even what I was told, it's seeing it, right? And for each of these characters, they're observing something, right? And I want to get into perspectives. How do you tap into those perspectives? And each one does it differently, you know? Like there's the diaries for Courtney's, yours is first person, and like I said, Nafisa's comes in stories, but we get different perspectives for Fatima when we get her specifically, like other things come into play as well. So can we talk a little bit about parentage and also for the origins of your characters, if you tapped into something personal to also look at how we kind of aim to belong in a way? Because it starts at a young age. It starts very, very young.
That's a big question. Yeah. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for that question. For my characters, so my book deals with a lot of black middle class characters who are the only one or one of the only one in a particular space. And so I think with motherhood in particular, you're seeing with Fatima this desire for a respectable daughter, and also with another character who's an ASMR artist whose mother is very much policing her body image and her internet image. And I think one of the main arguments I'm trying to make through those characters and through representing their parents is that respectability doesn't actually save you. You know, it's a very flawed rhetoric, this idea that if you behave perfectly enough in front of white folks, they will treat you better and you won't die. That's kind of the short version of it. But it's just not true. I mean, statistics do not bear out that our behavior in any way can change white supremacy, right? It's their responsibility to change it. So for me, the respectability that's coming from the parents is kind of like a moot point that they're pushing for as a way of getting their children to be accepted by white people, and it always falls apart for them.
Is it okay if we go on down the line? In my book, the mother-daughter dynamic is the crux of the entire novel. Costa Alegre is based on a fictionalized version of the relationship between the heiress and art collector Peggy Guggenheim and her only daughter, Pegeen. Fictionalized in the book as Leonora, Calloway, and Lara. And what we're dealing with in the book is a 15-year-old who is truly yearning to not just have a talent, but a real gift, the likes of which she sees in all of the, she calls them the loonies, all of them, the artists, the greatest artists of that particular generation that her mother has helped escape World War II Europe. And she's trying and trying to get not just her art recognized by her mother, but her entire entity. And her mother actually forgets her in location. She truly doesn't see her. Lara gets left behind places. She's overlooked. She's literally not counted for when they're seeing how many people are in this resort place in Mexico where they're waiting in exile. So the longing to belong, the yearning to belong is twofold. Lara wants to ascend to the hierarchy of you know, the Marcel Duchamps and the Salvador Dali's of this epic, and she also just wants her mother to claim her as her own, and it doesn't look like either of these things are going to happen in the book.
So I think like, I don't know, I'm kind of stuck on this, when you mentioned the stats around respectability, because one of the things, like thinking about perspective and why I chose to write it in a first person, at the end, when I started writing the book, I started writing it in third person because I wanted to bring in all this historical information about this moment in history and also contextualize the limitations and challenges for women during that time period as immigrants. But when I looked at the statistics, like when you start researching and thinking about what are the options women actually have even now, I think many parents are still making the same choices that they would make. Like, I don't think my grandmother would have made a different choice for my mother. This is very loosely based on, inspired by my mother's story, who immigrated to the United States in the 70s when she was 15, married to a man twice her age as well. And I think that for me, writing it in the first person actually gave the character more agency, because in third person, I felt that the mother, in some ways, became more villain in making this choice for her and leaving this young girl without really a voice to speak up or do anything. But if she's telling her own story right away, she has agency. But one of the things that I've been thinking too is how writing the book itself, which I think maybe this is why I wrote this book, is that I think for a very long time I villainized my grandmother for not giving my mother an opportunity to marry for love or choose her own path. And what I've learned through the process is that actually it's not even a choice, right? Like, it's almost like, what are the other options that really women have in particular contexts? My mother was also married at 14 with a man twice her age. The possibilities for sovereignty as a woman in Dominican Republic, the way the economy is. But it's not just Dominican Republic. I would say even the whole world, right? Like, patriarchy and misogyny are so prevalent that when you think about what are the possibilities, I think that she would have made the same choice. So, yeah.
Ooh, I have follow-up, but we're going to hear from Courtney right now.
I'll keep it brief. Tiny bit of setup. So we're in 1937. We're a group of about 10 different artists, writers, intellectuals who have been taken out of Europe by this Peggy Guggenheim type character. And the book is from a diary point of view of her 15-year-old daughter. We're at a point in the novel where the Leonora Calloway is waiting for news of this boat that the A-list artists got to come on a plane. The B-list artists and their art are apparently coming by ship. They have no news of their ship. They're truly in the jungle. It's hard to get news. They also don't have a sense of whether or not war is truly coming. And they're very small sections. Each starts with the day in Spanish. Martes. I am in trouble for my dream brief. Legrand says I'm not going deep enough. What was drying on the clothesline? 3 riderless horses running on the beach towards the massive copa that the American installed, a structure of cement that looks like a huge moon cup, an offering for rain. This isn't how you would have dreamt it, Legrand says of my wet papers. All of this exists. Try again, he said, handing me more paper, the charcoal dusted on his skin and mine. But that's what I dreamt. I know what's happening with you, he said, bending lower, and this isn't what you dreamt. I bit my lip hard between my teeth to keep my stupid chin from trembling. What is the worst about Legrand is that he's been there all along. He knows whether I was wanted. He knows whether I am now. He knows everything, sees everything, ruins everything. He is the reason she is restless. Her restlessness is the reason we cannot stay in any house, and why Father couldn't stay with us, he who just wanted to write in his study and all the drinks at night. I dreamt of a carafe filled with feces and red wine. I dreamt of Maria with her face on backward, her hair down to her waist. I dreamt of the larders emptied except for her black hair. I dreamt of a figure marching on a bloated stomach, red cloak on the ground. I only dreamt the horses, is what I said to Antoine Legrand. Viernes. The door to my room is still only made of fabric. Things fly in through the round window that I cannot name. In the morning, if I walk out on the terrace, the white whales crest and spout. I am painting. I am painting quite a lot. I am painting the true things that I dream about. Lunes. More papers, and by that I mean real news. All of the German people are united into one country. The top jobs have been given to the nationalsocialismes. A man named Seyss Inquart is now the Minister of the Interior. Mother paid heaps to have the news brought from Vallarta, and I drew the name into the things I'm painting, like one of Conrad's old collages where paint was mixed with fact. Seyss Inquart. Too many S's and strange letters. Y, I, Q. At the table, when the newspaper was shown to us, Walter said the name in German, and my skin bumped into goose freckles, even in this heat. Jewish Austrians are washing the streets with handfuls of torn clothing. There was a photo of this, too. Men, women, and even children on their knees, and it is winter. The streets would be wet, you know, so it's even colder for their knees. You'll all thank me later, is what my mother said. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I want to go back to what Angie was saying about perspectives over time, that we think they change, they may not inherently change as much as we think they do. And so each of you are writing in a different time period. Nafisa's, yours is more contemporary, yours is, Angie, late 60s and 1937, so that's pre-World War II and all this stuff. And there's also a lot of mention of the civil rights movement, like Malcolm X, the geography, the geographic location of Anna to sadly, Malcolm's death, all that keeps being referenced. So obviously, like those divides, racial tensions, all that stuff comes up as well. So in terms of looking at different time periods, did you kind of think more about that? And you said you saw that, especially in terms of making people the villain, quote unquote. And I think even Courtney, there's an ability to easily villainize Lara's mother, I think, perspective from her. And if, Nafisa, in the stories, it's just so collective of talking about like a social consciousness we're looking at today, but it really does speak to what has been so embedded in everything that we've learned that we're ignoring in a lot of ways. So when we look at this idea, again, of belonging, did you kind of recognize that in the pursuits of your respective stories of, wow, things haven't really changed, or wow, can we really talk about what happened without talking what happened?
Can I?
Sure.
I think this is such an important question. And it's something that I spent a lot of time thinking about, and then I didn't think that I could write this book. I didn't think that I had the right necessarily. I'm not Jewish. The World War II period, Holocaust, all of these things, I spent a lot of time wondering why I should have any right to approach such a subject. But I started thinking, first of all, when I settled on the fact that I wanted this to be written from the voice of this 15-year-old who was someone who existed and was quite effaced from history. I get some, I don't read my Amazon reviews, but my husband does, and he'll tell me like some people are really upset that this is in 1937 when it should be in 1941. But what I thought about and what finally made me think like, no, I can write about this, is I wanted to tackle the period right before World War II. So in 1937, there was a great and very exciting output of art, so much so that Hitler put on this massive art show of culturally degenerate work that was quite visible. Now, of course, he was taking the gallery list and turning it into a hit of the people that he was going to go and incarcerate. But at that specific time, before things turned and became the horror that is known to us and will never leave us, there was a parallel atmosphere, I think, to what I saw before Trump was elected, which was this sort of decadent ignorance that the worst could possibly, it's not going to come to pass, but how exciting that we get to rub up against this terror. And I really felt that I could tap into, we are dealing with one art patron and the artist she supports. Those power dynamics were interesting to me. But I really did feel that I had the right to revisit a period where you have these people, they're very special. They're special enough that they get to be saved. And they're a little excited by this unknown darkness. But no one in the book yet has an actual understanding, except for one person, of how, bad word, terrible things are going to get. And that is an energy and ignorance that I wanted to revisit, because I think it's so present with us in terms of not just our government, but our climate. I mean, we are just, this like delight in ignorance is darkly interesting to me.
Yeah, a lot of what you're saying is resonant with what I was trying to do. When I was writing this book, I, first of all, thought that I was not the kind of writer who wanted to look back a lot. I was like, I'm gonna write a book about living Black people. It has to be living Black people because most of our literature has been about our death, and so everybody's gonna live in this book. That didn't happen. And also they're going to live in the present. It's gonna be a contemporarily set book. But so much of what I was finding and doing the research and trying to write about contemporary issues was that we haven't really made a lot of progress. And the original author, whose title I've stolen, James McCune Smith, who wrote the original The Heads of the Colored People done with a whitewash brush, that was the title of his 19th century work where basically he anthologized a bunch of individual sketches that he was publishing in Frederick Douglass's newspaper. And he was this abolitionist, this Black doctor. And most of his concerns, voter suppression, I mean, we didn't have rights to vote back then, I should say. But the same kinds of concerns, are Black people, are people of color going to have the full rights of citizenship on paper, are the very concerns we're revisiting every day, because we have a president and a legislature who are rolling back all of those things in very visible ways that some people would like to ignore. And so a lot of the things in the book, to me, I thought I was updating, and it ended up just sort of being like reiterating what people have been saying in Black literature forever. Our whole canon has been saying this. Our obscure works that aren't canonized have been saying the same things. And so I really just see myself now as joining a larger conversation, not doing any sort of updating.
I'm trying to think what I can add to that. I feel like one of the things that I have found interesting about writing about the 60s is that a lot of the feedback I'm getting from readers is that they're saying, oh, this happened to me. That's the feedback I'm getting, which I think from all over, right? And from all cultures, from all spaces in the US, mostly because they're American readers that are getting it. And I find that it's sometimes when you're writing about something in the past, it's easier to look at your own life in the present because it doesn't have that terrifying kind of, oh my God, this is happening to everyone. But like it's, so what I think has been really interesting in thinking about writing a book about the 60s of this particular situation, which is really about domestic violence and being a survivor, is that women today are reading it. And I think it's more easier to receive because of the Me Too movement, right? So I even think the ways things are received are also connected to the political movements of the moment. And I think because of the Me Too movement, women are ready to talk about certain or have certain kinds of conversations. So the way this book is read wasn't, I mean, I've been working on this book for 14 years, right? So it's a very different, but the way it's being received, the way it's being read, I think the way even Dominicans are reading the book and embracing the African American story within the civil rights movement and Dominicans and how they're involved is because of all the movements around Afro-Latinidad and Me Too. So like that shifts perspective, right? So even if things haven't really changed systemically, let's say, for people of color, the immigration problem seems to be much worse, I think, as far as like entering and exiting the country and the opportunities. There's a way that the perspective of people, readers, has changed because of the hard work of mostly women, led by women, right? Like Minorities in Publishing, and We Need Diverse Books, and Me Too, and all these, that makes works legible in a different way, or receivable in a different way. So you could have the same story, but in this particular moment, it's received in a new way.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm mad because we have 15 minutes and we have skimmed the surface. Nafisa, will you grace us with your words?
So I'm going to read a little bit from a story in my collection called Fatima the Biloquist, and we've mentioned Fatima a few times now. She's a character who recurs. She's in 3 stories. She's also the focus of my novel in progress, so you'll see her again. Oh, I like that noise. Thank you.
Yeah, we got some churchums.
I was like a black? Okay. So this story is about Fatima learning how to be black. It's set in the mid-90s, like 1996-ish, learning how to be more authentically black from her friend, who is a black woman living with albinism. So this is like a brown-skinned black girl learning how to be black from the lightest-skinned black person that you could possibly meet. If only Baratunde Thurston had been writing when Fatima had come of age, she could have learned how to be black from a book instead of from Violet's charm school. Even a quick glance at Ralph Ellison could have saved her a lot of trouble, but she wasn't ready for that, caught up as she was in the dramas of Arthur Mervyn and Carwin the Biloquist and all of them. With Violet's help, Fatima absorbed the social cultural knowledge she'd missed not through osmosis or through more relevant literature, but through committed, structured ethnographical study. She immersed herself in slang as rigorously as she would later immerse herself in Spanish for her foreign language exam in grad school. She pored over Vibe magazine and watched Yo MTV Raps and the Parkers, trying to work her mouth around phrases with the same intonation that Countess Vaughn used, a sort of combination of a Jersey accent and a speech impediment. When she couldn't get into those texts, she encouraged herself with the old episodes of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air that played in constant early morning and late night rotation, feeling assured that if Ashley Banks could, after 5 seasons, become almost as cool as Will, then she could too. Her new turns of phrase fit her about as awkwardly as the puffy powder blue FUBU jacket she found in a thrift store in downtown Rialto. Still, she was happy when Violet looked approvingly at it. Pale Violet became the arbiter of Fatima's blackness, the purveyor of all things authentic. The distance between their respective houses was 15 minutes, but only 7 if they met halfway. Fatima borrowing her extra car from her father, the 1993 Beamer, so as not to look ostentatious, and Violet getting a ride from one of her brothers, or occasionally driving her mother's old Taurus. They never met at each other's houses, lest Fatima's upper-middle opulence embarrass Violet, and because there was no space for Violet to carve out for herself at her own house. Violet made Fatima a study guide of the top 10 black expressions for rating attractive men, and they practiced the pronunciations together. The pinnacle of hotness, according to Violet, was either dang foine, hella foine, or bout it, as in, ooh, he bout it. I can't ever say that without feeling extremely embarrassed, okay? This phrase especially required the Countess Vaughn intonation and often included spontaneous bouts of raising the roof. During their tutoring sessions, Fatima stifled her joke about the rain in Spain falling mostly on the plains and practiced on, assured that Violet's instruction would confer upon her, like Carwin, a wonderful gift of biloquism. Glossaries soon followed in which Violet broke down slang that had previously mystified Fatima. She couldn't wait to replace her traditional for sure with for show in a real conversation, but she took issue with some of Violet's recommendations, especially nigga and gangsta, which Violet explained as a term of endearment. So basically, Fatima summarized, ventriloquizing Ashley Banks again, you want me to turn good things into bad things and vice versa. Violet said, mostly. Fatima tried pumping her shoulders in a brief bankhead bounce, but it was obvious she lacked the follow-through and wasn't ready for dancing yet. And it was almost like any romantic comedy in which the sassy black person moves in with the white people and teaches them how to live their lives in color and puts some bass in their voices, only Steve Martin wasn't in it, and no one was a maid or a butler or a nanny, and the romance was between 2 girls, and it was platonic, and they were both black this time, but one didn't look like it and one didn't sound like it, at least not consistently. Thanks.
So I also want to be mindful of time. I have more questions, but does anyone in the audience have questions? Because we have about 10, 11, 12 minutes. Are y'all's not caffeinated either? Okay, there you go. So the question is for Courtney about how much research went into her novel, and when you found stuff, did it like kind of derail or put you on
And
a
I'm
path?
sure that we all have, the relationship of a writer to research is something that's endlessly fascinating to me because it's both necessary, even if you're not doing a historical project, and it can be a delightful procrastination. So one of the things I had to do with this book in particular was understand when to stop researching. But I researched exclusively for a year, and I had a really specific way in which I did it. I filled up these black journals with all the things that I thought were salient that I could possibly use, and then when they were full, I would go back with a yellow highlighter, and then I would take the yellow bits, the VIP bits, to a giant piece of watercolor paper, and I did that over and over and over again until I'd memorized all the most important parts, so that when I decided it was time to stop researching, I actually felt that I could channel this person's, I didn't have to look at my notes, it was all in my head.
Is anyone else? Yes.
But it's been a long time.
And I was just wondering if, and your first story was about like this character I love that he's in the cosplay, it was just really testing this with a lot of not there. I'm just wondering if sort of intellectualism or plays a part also with that not being.
So the question is for Nafisa about whether intellectualism also plays into the feeling of belonging based on what she said about black people like fitting in to white culture.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think for a long time there has been a sort of hypervisibility of white nerd culture and even Asian nerd culture, and so you can be an intellectual and still find your people in those groups, and you certainly can as a black person. It just hasn't been as visible, right, in media. So it was important for me to not only document that kind of nerdiness, but to also think about the ways that an academic nerdiness and intellectual nerdiness can make you sort of unfit for either space. And that's because you are an intersectional nerd. You're a black person and a nerd, right? So there's racism operating at the same time that like normal, everybody gets backlash for being nerdiness is happening. And the intersections of those two kinds of backlash, I think, are really specific and need to be addressed. So I do think part of it is from being smart, but part of it's also just from being black and being in a particular space that isn't as visible or recognizable.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yes. So the question's for Nafisa and Angie in terms of decision making and whether personal rather than authorial, you mean, feelings also came into play in the writing of each of these characters.
I actually ended up writing an essay called Writing Toward Forgiveness because I feel like I had a lot of anger toward my father, who wasn't like the kindest man. And I feel like the same thing with my grandmother, who I didn't understand why she would make that choice. And I feel that, yes, sometimes I think in the early revisions, you will see your tendency or biases, right? Because you're writing the book. But I feel like as I'm writing, these characters become their own complicated beings. And if you don't write a complicated character, I mean, even a villain is loved, and there's something there that will redeem them in some way. And I feel like that is part of the craft of the work, right? Where you're revisiting a work and you're trying to make a character its own entity. So yeah, it makes a better read, yeah.
I write almost purely out of spite. Like 15% that's motivated by something else, but it's mostly spite. So all of my drafts are like quite petty, very authorial, and I have to work my way towards what's best for this character, what's best for this story. But there are all kinds of inside jokes that are like my digs at things, because I'm not writing from a place of forgiveness. You sound so much more involved.
I mean, I feel like, no, it's not. I learned through experience, right? So I would read my drafts and I say, wow, what an asshole. And then I would be like, oh, wait, like I could, there were things, like why do people care about this man, right? So I think like I learned that something about writing makes me see people more full. And I feel this is what reading does, right? That's why they say reading makes you more empathetic. Actually, reading does make you more empathetic because you could look at a person you don't agree with and suddenly see them in a more complicated way, not just like, oh, you know, I can't even talk to you. And I also have learned through experience is that even if I see someone as a villain, and people always ask this as young writers, they're like, aren't you afraid someone's gonna see themselves in the book and you're depicting them in this negative way? And I say, you know, my experience is that every villain that I thought was a villain to me, they see themselves as a hero.
I will say that
because it's about perspective.
That's true. I will say that some of my stories are autobiographical, and seeing the reception of them has changed the way that I've thought about the characters and who were the villains and who were sort of the heroes of various stories. Because people will say to me, so Fatima has this person who's bullying her whole life that has been, it's clearly like a thinly veiled autobiographical story about me and my childhood bully, who was the other black girl at my school, and our mothers really did clash with each other, so that is also autobiographical. But other people will read that girl as like a tragic figure, and they feel really sorry for her. And I'm usually a little bit irritated with them, like, no, you don't know. Well, they're not talking about the details of what happened, they're talking about the story. And that does tell me that I must have complicated her at some level, which is what writing is supposed to do. It's not supposed to give you these sort of stock, flat characters. You're supposed to not be sure who's right, who's wrong, and sort of what's going on, because otherwise it doesn't challenge you. So I do appreciate that that's coming out, even if it's not in my actual brain.
Can each of you briefly touch on like how you do that? Or like, how did you learn, like what made that awareness before? Because we're in critique groups or we're being learned. So before this book becomes a book, there is that moment where it's self-realization or like maybe watching a movie or having a conversation with someone where you're like, oh, I did or didn't do that to like flesh this person out.
Well, the state of anger psychosomatically is very difficult to stay in, I find.
I don't find that.
No. Well, but like you can have a simmering anger. I should speak for myself. Apologize. I can have a simmering anger, but to always be the fight or flight thing is a bit tough. I actually had someone write me who knew Peggy Guggenheim and said you were too easy on her. Wow. She was much crueler than this. But when I was writing the book, I thought about, well, specifically with a mother and daughter relationship. Can you truly be angry all the time? Are there not glimpses of potential improvement, a softer kind of kindness, a glimpse of hopefulness? I mean, certainly in relationships that I've been in that were turning sour, like romantic relationships, before it all ended, there were these moments of possibility. And I find that I used to write, I think, just from a livid point of view all the time, and I didn't find that writing was going to provide a very pleasurable experience to the reader, and I think it's actually more impactful when the anger is simmering. Again, this is my personal point of view, but when the anger simmers, and you sort of turn away for a second, and the water boils over and scalds you, these moments of, I don't know, it's a sustainability thing. I think I'm rambling, so I'll retreat.
I think that makes a lot of sense, what you're saying. I wouldn't have learned how to write characters who weren't flat and just sort of stock, obvious villains or heroes if it weren't for an intervention from Jacinda Townsend. She was teaching at Callaloo Workshop several years ago, and it was right before my book was going to come out. And I was still in revisions right before we went on, actually it was right before my book went on submission to editors. And she said, you don't love your characters enough. You're funny, but you don't love these people. And that changed the way I thought about writing. She was like, unless you actually can find something to love about every character, you will write in a really flat way, unless you find the empathy yourself, even if you're trying to characterize someone who's completely problematic to you. You have to find that little thing that you can relate to, and you need to put that on the page. Otherwise, it's just going to fall apart. And that did help me go back in and revise everything, I think, significantly.
I actually, really specifically, I have a very, Juan, who is the one that proposes to Ana. He was very unlikable in the first readings of him, and it was very frustrating for some of the readers. They're like, he's just so unlikable, I don't know if I could bear this story. And one night, and this is a craft thing, but also a personal thing, I was devastated and despair, and I wanted to quit writing this book. And my friend sent me this video of her doing karaoke. And I thought, I was so jealous, and I said, what am I doing working on a novel? It's so miserable making, and I should just be hang out with friends. But I've never done karaoke, and I was like, why? And I was like, because I don't think I could sing. And then I said, what made me think I can't sing? And then I went online to learn how to sing, and according to the internet, I'm a very good singer. I have great range and pitch. And I sang for a whole day. I quit writing, and I sang for a whole day, and I thought I would change careers. And then the day after, I said, holy shit, my unlikable character is going to have the most beautiful voice ever. And I said, ooh, it's going to be hard to hate him completely. And that was, and then I realized that in the subtext of the novel, he did have a talent, but had never shown it in the book. And that solved that character.
Yeah, that's good.
So I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank Angie, Courtney, and Nafisa, not only for these amazing books. for this wonderful panel. This has been an absolute delight. You can get their books at Greenlight, which is right outside, and then they will be signing right downstairs. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Jennifer.